I've got some breaking news. It's kind of a last minute episode that I'm throwing together because of this information that I've been able to confirm.
Brian Entin spoke with Dr. Gary Brucato, a forensic psychologist and criminal profiler who has been analyzing the language of both credible notes since the beginning of this investigation. He stated that the second ransom note in the Nancy Guthrie case is from a woman, and when he explains why, the picture he builds of who is actually behind this case is unlike anything that has been publicly stated before. But before we get there, start with the first note, because the opening line alone stopped Brucato cold. "Hello, Savannah. We have your mother, Nancy." Not "hello, family," not to the Guthrie family. "Hello, Savannah." One sibling, singled out by name in the opening word of a ransom demand. Brucato said that detail is either practical or deeply personal, and neither explanation is comfortable. The practical version is that whoever wrote this note believed Savannah specifically was the most capable source of the ransom money given her public profile. The personal version is more disturbing, that there is an unconscious secondary motive at work, some interpersonal dynamic tied specifically to her as an individual that goes beyond the financial demand. He pointed out that Savannah has likely been walking around feeling partially responsible, wondering if she is the reason her mother was targeted. And whoever wrote that note, he said, does not appear to mind her carrying that weight. Addressing it directly to her alone seems designed to deepen it. That is not the psychology of a random opportunistic criminal. That is the psychology of someone who knows this family, who has feelings about this family, who chose one specific name at the top of a ransom note for a reason that goes beyond money. Then there is the word we. Brucato zeroed in on it immediately. We have your mother, Nancy. Not I, we. That single word, if the note is genuine, settles one of the central questions of this investigation. This was not one person acting alone. There is a group, and that group dynamic is exactly where Brucato believes this case will eventually break open. Now here is the detail that changes how you read the entire timeline of the first note. There was no proof of life. In a traditional kidnapping, especially with an elderly victim, proof of life arrives within 24 to 48 hours. You want the family to know their person is alive and reachable. You want them desperate and motivated to pay. Without proof of life, you have no leverage. And for an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition, the risk of a sudden medical event is not theoretical. It is the most foreseeable thing about the entire situation. Brucato's read is that the absence of proof of life in the first note was not an oversight. It was because by the time that note was written, Nancy may already have been gone, and whoever sent it knew that, and tried to collect the ransom anyway. If you are new to this channel and you have been following this case, subscribe before we go any further because every development in this investigation comes here first, and this next part is exactly why. Now here is where the second note becomes the most forensically interesting document in this entire case. Because Brucato does not just analyze what it says, he analyzes how it says it. And the how is what led him to conclude the writer is likely female. The language of the second note is sensitive, almost poetic. She perished shortly after she was taken. She is buried in nature now. We are truly sorry. Brucato said that passivity, that sensitivity, that almost literary quality in the phrasing is not how men typically write under pressure. He drew a direct comparison to the JonBenet Ramsey case, where investigators spent significant time analyzing whether the ransom note's language patterns were more consistent with a male or female author. His conclusion on the Nancy Guthrie notes. The first note does not read like a woman wrote it. The second note does. Two notes, same case, same general sender, two completely different emotional registers. And that difference is not just academically interesting. It is the fracture line Brucato believes could bring this entire case down. Two people, two completely different personalities. One who stood on Nancy Guthrie's porch in the dark with a weapon, covered a camera with his gloved hand, and showed no visible anxiety on footage reviewed by dozens of investigators. And one who sat down days later and wrote, "She is buried in nature now. We are truly sorry." Brucato has a specific name for this dynamic, a chef and a waiter, someone behind the curtain who planned everything and has intimate knowledge of Nancy and her world. And someone out front doing the visible work who has no real stake in the outcome beyond whatever they were paid to be there. He has believed from the beginning that porch guy is a hired hand, a goon brought in specifically to create the impression of an outside stranger. Someone whose job was to make this look like a random targeted abduction by an unknown intruder, rather than something that originated from inside Nancy's world. And that person, he said, has probably been on the radar of local law enforcement before, possibly even currently incarcerated. His recommendation has not changed. Circulate that doorbell footage inside local jails, because even with a mask covering the face, gait is instantly recognizable to people who know someone. Someone currently inside that system would very likely identify that figure the moment they saw it walking across the screen. But here is what Brucato said that cuts straight to where this case goes from here. When you have a pairing of people in a crime, and one of them is cold and dominant, and the other is more emotionally entangled, the second person is almost always the one who cracks under sustained pressure. Not necessarily out of conscience. Sometimes simply because the weight of carrying something like this day after day, watching it on the news, hearing it discussed, feeling the drumbeat of a national investigation that will not go away, becomes heavier than the fear of what comes next if they talk. He described it as a pressure cooker. The longer it runs, the more unbearable the silence becomes. And he believes the person who wrote that second note is already at the edge of that breaking point. Someone who felt something about what happened to Nancy. Someone who could not stay silent in the immediate aftermath and reached out unprompted to say it was not supposed to go this way. That is not the behavior of someone at peace with what they did. That is the behavior of someone who has been barely holding it together since February. Now here is where Sheriff Nanos' radio interview this week adds a specific detail worth paying attention to. He confirmed that the joint task force working this case is larger than previously reported. The Pima County Sheriff's Office alone is contributing between 10 and 20 people meeting daily at the FBI's Tucson field office. Previous reporting had that number at 6 or 7. The increase in confirmed personnel tells you this investigation has not wound down. It has expanded. And those people are not meeting every day because they have nothing to work with. Nanos also made something explicit that had previously only been implied. The FBI handles the ransom note component of the investigation. The sheriff's office handles the DNA component through their own private lab arrangement. 2 agencies, 2 separate evidence tracks, running simultaneously toward the same destination. Now let me get into the Bitcoin picture. Because Shawn O'Connor, a cybersecurity executive with the SANS Institute, who has spent decades working on exactly this kind of case, explained something this week that most people following this investigation have completely misunderstood. The $164 the FBI deposited into the ransom wallet is not sitting there because the investigation stalled. It is sitting there because it is a trap, a dusting attack. A recognized law enforcement technique where investigators send a small amount of cryptocurrency into a target wallet and monitor it closely. The moment whoever controls that wallet attempts to move those funds, that transaction gets logged permanently on the blockchain. And the FBI has tools and private sector partnerships that can trace that movement toward a real identity faster than most people realize. But here is what O'Connor said that reframes the entire Bitcoin thread. The trail has not gone cold. It never started. The wallet used in this case appears to be a clean burner wallet created solely for this purpose, with no prior transaction history, no connections to any known exchange, no fingerprint of any kind that investigators could use to trace backwards from the wallet itself. That is not a sign of sophisticated criminal expertise. O'Connor was direct about this. It does not take advanced Bitcoin knowledge to create a burner wallet. What it takes is enough awareness to know that $164 is not worth the risk of moving it. The person controlling that wallet looked at what the FBI deposited and made a calculated decision. The exposure is not worth the payout. And that calculation, O'Connor said, is actually more consistent with someone who is scared than someone who is sophisticated. Now here is the detail from O'Connor that matters most for where this case goes. He said it will not be solved by digital evidence alone or human intelligence alone. It will be solved when someone with human knowledge of what happened steps forward, and that human lead connects to a piece of digital evidence that has been sitting there waiting to be tied to a name. Those 2 things meeting in the middle is how cases like this break. The drumbeat Brucato described, the sustained public pressure of a national investigation that will not go away, is exactly the environmental condition that makes the human intelligence side of that equation more likely to produce something. Someone gets tired. Someone gets scared. Someone makes a phone call they have been putting off for 5 months, and when that call comes, the digital evidence is already waiting for it. Okay, so let me bring everything together. Because what Brucato, O'Connor, and the sheriff all said this week, taken as a single picture, points towards something specific about where this investigation is actually heading. Start with what Brucato said about the chef and the waiter. Someone behind the curtain with intimate knowledge of Nancy's world planned this. Someone out front with no real personal stake executed it. Two people, two completely different emotional profiles. One cold enough to stand on that porch without flinching. One sensitive enough to write, "She is buried in nature now," and mean it. That pairing is not just a psychological theory. It is an investigative roadmap, because in every case Brucato has studied involving that dynamic, the more emotionally entangled person eventually talks. Not always immediately, not always voluntarily, but under enough sustained pressure, the weight of what they know becomes heavier than the risk of putting it down. And the pressure in this case has been extraordinary. 5 months of national coverage. A famous daughter on television every morning carrying private grief into public view. An FBI task force of between 10 and 20 Pima County personnel alone meeting daily in Tucson. DNA being processed at specialist labs across the country. A Bitcoin tripwire sitting untouched in a wallet the FBI is watching every single day. The drumbeat Brucato described has not stopped once since February 1st. Now here is the specific thing he said that I want you to hold on to. He does not believe the investigators are working with nothing. He said it is very hard in 2026 not to slip up and leave some kind of trail. And his feeling is that there is probably already a theory of what happened and who was responsible sitting inside this investigation. But pinning it legally to a specific person requires more than a theory. It requires evidence that can survive a defense attorney in a courtroom. That distinction between knowing and proving is where this investigation appears to be right now. The people working this case daily in Tucson are not starting from zero. They are building toward a threshold. The threshold where what they know becomes what they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury. And O'Connor's framework for how that threshold gets crossed is worth repeating clearly. Human intelligence provides depth. Digital evidence provides breadth. You need both. Someone steps forward with something they saw or heard or were told. That human lead connects to a piece of digital evidence that has been sitting there waiting. And that connection is what moves a case from theory to prosecution. Every thread running right now is building toward that moment from a different direction. The DNA labs are narrowing through genealogy databases that grow every week. The Bitcoin wallet is being watched for any movement that would trigger a traceable transaction. The doorbell footage is sealed and being protected for a reason that has not been publicly explained. The 911 call from the morning Nancy was found missing sits sealed inside a case file containing words spoken in raw panic before anyone had time to think about how they would sound to a jury. And somewhere in the orbit of this crime there is a person who wrote, "We are truly sorry," who could not stay silent in the days after Nancy died, who reached out unprompted to explain that it was not supposed to go this way. That person has been carrying that weight for 5 months, watching the coverage, feeling the drumbeat, understanding that the DNA labs are working and the Bitcoin tripwire is set and the task force is meeting every single morning. Brucato said something at the end of his conversation with Brian Entin that landed harder than almost anything else in this week's coverage. He said someone should put a message out there directly to whoever wrote that second note. We think you want to talk. We think you are grieving. Come forward. Because that window, the window where coming forward voluntarily still carries leverage, still carries the possibility of a deal, still carries something better than waiting for investigators to close in, does not stay open forever. Mark Garagos made the same point from the legal side. A lawyer, a reverse proffer, a structured conversation with prosecutors before investigators find what they are already looking for. That path exists right now. It will not exist indefinitely. The Hello Savannah that opened the first note. The buried in nature now that closed the second one. The $164 sitting untouched in a wallet the FBI is watching. The rootless hair being processed at specialist labs. The doorbell footage sealed inside an investigation that has grown larger, not smaller, 5 months in. None of these threads are cold. None of them are finished. They are all running simultaneously toward the same destination. And the person who wrote that apology note knows it. Nancy Guthrie went to Mass every Sunday morning. She called her daughter every single day without missing a beat. She had dinner with her family the night she was taken and let someone she loved walk her to her door. She deserved to grow old quietly in the home she loved. If you have made it this far, do not forget to subscribe so you can stay updated as this case develops. Something is moving. I will talk to you very soon.